Good morning. Welcome everyone to GDA Connect at the green zone of COP28 in Dubai. Thank you all for joining us, whether in person or remotely. I am Rasha Halwa, the director of the Atlantic Council's Empower Me initiative. In our first session, we explored the green energy potential in MENA and Sub-Saharan Africa from policy and business perspectives. For this session, our focus shifts to mobilizing private capital and enhancing innovation capabilities in the renewable sector of the Middle East and North Africa region in particular. I have the honor of introducing our esteemed panelists, starting with His Excellency, Dr. Thani bin Ahmed El Zayudi, the UAE's Minister of State for Foreign Trade, who also served as the former permanent representative of the UAE to the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. He was also the former director of the Department of Energy Affairs and Climate Change at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. Joining us also is Jay Collins, Vice Chairman of Public Sector and Banking at Citi, bringing over 3 decades of leadership experience at the nexus of international finance and global policy. Collins is a prominent advisor to global governments on sustainability, climate finance, privatization, and digital technology. We also have Maina Shala, the founder and executive chairwoman of De Novo Partners, an independent Middle East-focused corporate finance advisory firm. Mai previously held roles as non-executive chairman and senior advisor to BlackRock across the Middle East and was the head of investment banking for Middle East and North Africa at Morgan Stanley. We are also very honored to have with us today Dr. Mahmoud Mohieddin, UN Climate Change High-Level Champion for COP27 and Special Envoy on financing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development for the United Nations. Dr. Mahmoud, an economist with over 30 years of experience in international finance and development, previously served as the Minister of Investment of Egypt from 2004 to 2010. Welcome, esteemed panelists. Let's begin our discussion now. I'll now pass the floor to His Excellency for his brief remarks and his outlook on COP28, focusing on energy transition and the green energy market in MENA. Your Excellency.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Excellencies, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and very good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you all this morning, and as we host COP28, it's clear that it is a pivotal moment in our journey to establish a greener and more sustainable global economy. And the challenges are beyond the means of anyone and any country. It requires not just the commitment to act from our leaders, governments, and private sector, but also the rapid, large-scale mobilization of private capital and its operational expertise. It means a new source of energy, but also new means of production. It means new industries and new capabilities. Ultimately, it means a new way of thinking about our economy. In the UAE, we see this as an opportunity. We see the future of our planet as the biggest impact investment we can make, and we have made a start. Over the last 10 years, the UAE has increased our renewable energy capacity more than any other country in the world. We are now home of 3 of the world's largest solar plants, which between them produce the cheapest commercial scale solar energy in the planet. The 5.6 gigawatt Baraka nuclear plant in Abu Dhabi is saving 5 million tons of CO2 every year. And we are now building one of the largest waste to energy plants in the world that is, when it is going to be completed, will be generating 200 megawatts of electricity. Furthermore, our Green Falcon project is expanding knowledge of hydrogen production, storages, transport, and use in industry. And our activities are not just local. The UAE has invested over $50 billion in clean energy projects in 70 nations across 6 continents. And the UAE-US partnerships for accelerating clean energy is mobilizing $100 billion to develop 100 gigawatts of green energy by 2035. Southeast Asia's largest floating solar plant, a project supported by the UAE Clean Energy Pioneer Master, has just opened in Cirata, Indonesia. In Africa, we're investing in projects in solar, hydroelectric, and hydropower, and hydrogen projects. Excellencies and ladies and gentlemen, our commitments goes beyond the energy. The UAE creating ecosystem to nurture a new generation of businesses in clean tech, agri-tech, hybrid, transport, including aviation. And this ecosystem is attracting investors, innovators, industries, all committed to developing the breakthrough technologies our new economy needs. And the results speaks for themselves. We're the number one most funded country in MENA for clean climate tech ventures and have attracted the fourth highest number of greenfields projects in the world. We have created the environment that brings together government, businesses, R&Ds from across the world to create climate solutions that we need. And I do believe that this COP will shine a light on these activities and underline our long-term belief in and pursuit of economic diversifications. I really hope that it will create the networks that will lead to more partnerships and collaborations in these vital sectors with the MENA region at their heart. I'm looking forward for today's discussion and the possibilities for future action that will spark, inshallah. Thank you so much, and we're looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for the insightful introduction. Let me start my first question addressed to Jay. So the renewable energy sector is globally is anticipated to attract over 10 trillion in global investments by 2050. And despite the immense potential for green energy in the MENA region in particular, and especially in solar and wind power, this potential remains largely untapped. Merely 2% of global investments in renewable energy over the last 2 decades have been directed to this region, revealing significant regional disparities also. So as a global banker, how do you interpret the global investment landscape in renewables, and what factors contribute to the limited share of the MENA region?
Thank you. So let me just make sure you can you hear me in the back? Because I know it's not easy. So I'll speak up a little. So a couple of things. First of all, if you look at the levelized cost of energy and what's happened in terms of the operational cost of solar and wind, it is plummeted to the point where the fundamental funding cost is basically in the geography of where we're putting it, in solar and wind, in weak credit zip codes, meaning that you have extraordinary risks in the enabled environment or lack thereof, in the political risk, the economic risk, that we need to mitigate in order to get these projects done. And I think that we have a failure to mobilize, and part of what this COP is about is really what can we do to better scale the financing by mitigating risk and to take the early stage of capital-oriented reform of the MDBs and drive systemic change to mitigate risk with products and tools out of the MDBs, but beyond the MDBs, that allow the wealth of GFANs, or basically net zero committed banks, insurance companies, and pension funds to move from their regulated and fiduciary responsibility of investment grade risk into a lot of the projects in the renewable space. And second, I would say, and this is something that is really just kind of started to hit me harder looking at a lot of these projects, particularly as we look at hydrogen. We can't transition without transmission. And because bankers, as we finance, oftentimes with strong off-takers out of these zones, we realize that actually you have to fund the full chain. And you have to see through to the off-taker. And we are stuck at the grid. So, we have this new renewable objective, but the world needs 50 million miles of enhanced, fixed, or new grid to be built between now and 2040. That's 2,000 times around the planet new. That's double what we have. It's basically taking everything that we have now and doubling it between now and 2040. And just remember, unless you do that, you can want to scale generation all day, but unless you build the grid to plug into it, we will just never get there.
Thank you, Jay. And now let's go to my, when discussing the MENA region, these are very different countries. So it's evident that, the area is not uniform. The GCC nations, which are major oil exporters in the region, hold different economic prerequisites compared to middle-income oil importing economies like Egypt and Morocco. So how do you assess the opportunities and challenges associated with investing in renewables with these two distinct country groups?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. I think it's important for us to maybe bifurcate between those that are able to be enablers, countries that are able to be enablers for transition and for investments in energy versus those that are, if you want, net takers of assistance for that. And I think that's how I would bifurcate between the GCC countries in general and the middle income countries around the region. The GCC specifically has been amazing leaders in energy transition, despite the fact that they are the biggest producers of oil and gas. What we're seeing is this incredible push from the part of government and the part of the NOCs to be responsible towards that transition. So we're hearing announcements where bold statements from the UAE are saying that by 2050, 44% of their energy is going to be renewable. And Saudi, even bolder, saying that 50% of their energy will be renewable by 2030. And they're willing to put a lot of sort of money and funding and transition towards all of that and real action towards that. To the point where we're seeing a substantial amount of FDIs coming in. So $120 billion worth of FDIs came in in 2022 into renewables. So all of the actions that have been taken by policy, by procedure, by living through all of that has been incredible in resulting in a lot of that transition taking place in the GCC. But also, and we've heard His Excellency talk a little bit earlier, the UAE has been a leader in putting $50 billion worth of FDIs into transition into neighboring countries and economies. So a lot of these middle income countries have been the beneficiary of the GCC coming in and helping in that, in addition to a lot of foreign economies as well, foreign capital as well. I think it's incredibly important that we focus the attention on the fact that the public sector is going to be the biggest source of allowing this type of transition to take place and to helping it. I think something very interesting is going on outside, probably more interesting than what we're saying. But anyway, I think the net recipients of countries like Egypt, which I think Dr. Muhyiddin can speak to it a lot better than I can, that they are in need of having international organizations coming in and being helpful in that assistance towards that transition. And today, while oil prices are at the peak that they're in, that's a great way for us to provide the means for that transition to be taking place, whether it's in the GCC or in middle-income countries.
Thank you, Mai. Now I go to Dr. Muhyiddin. With your extensive experience, including your role as the UN Special Envoy on financing the 2030 agenda, that's not an easy job for sure. You possess unique insights into the complexities of mobilizing capital, especially within significant multi-stakeholder efforts at the country level. So from your perspective, how can MENA countries establish an investment framework conducive to mobilizing private capital into the green energy sector? Is it more of a regulatory issue? Is it more of a multi-stakeholder conversation that is broken? Where do we start?
Right. Thank you so much. And let me start by commending the excellent work by the presidency of the COP here and the great effort, not just in the organization, but we had a very good start as well in strong announcements relevant to our discussion today, not just the loss and damage, but the replenishment of the Green Climate Fund, the completion of it, and of course this impressive initiative by the UAE for the $30 billion for investments, including catalytic support of $5 billion. and the start was in Africa doing something similar, 4.5 billion with 1 billion as catalytic support. I think that goes back to what the minister mentioned earlier about not just the money, the finance. Some countries have the capacity to fund what they are after of strategies, including, of course, the UAE, but it's basically about the business environment, the determination with targets, with specific timeline, regardless of the changes of government, regardless of the changes of line ministries. There is something that you can really refer to. And these projects, and as all of the speakers around the table know, it's basically about long-term planning. And here I like just to get into 3 points. First, by this global assessment of the gaps, perhaps we can do something more at the local national level with a bit of granularity on what is required, not just to stop where Nixon and Vera Songwe led us to understand about the gaps, and it's a very good report that we supported in COP27, and COP28 now is taking the lead. And they are telling us simply that at the global level, private sector, led by my two good friends here, need to multiply their efforts and investments by a factor of 4. This is quadrupling private sector finance. When it comes to the MDBs that Jay mentioned, they need a factor of no less than 3. So they need to triple that effort. And when it comes to bilateral finance, from conventional donors like OECD or contributors, or new ones like the UAE, that needs really to be multiplied by a factor of 2. And all of these elements cannot really be of substitute to others. Private sector is not just about funding. It's about agility, innovation, risk-taking, dynamism. The MDBs are required for their work in order to de-risk and to travel with them in the higher risk environments in frontier markets, especially when it comes to bad perception. And then the work on the bilateral financiers is requiring this kind of partnership as well with the MDBs. So I'm just trying to search with you where could be the starting points. Here, the negotiators have elements under their control. They are shareholders, they are the owners of the World Bank and the African Development Bank and the GCF and the likes. They can take decisions with political determination to immediately increase the capital of these organizations. A country like mine, a middle-income country, its share of access is dwarfed. Compare 1995 to what is expected in 2025. These institutions are becoming less and less relevant when it comes to the significance of finance. But still, when insisting in getting their money, as China is, based on that nice rule that we can do it on our own and with our own rules, but with you as MDBs, we can do it better and faster. And here, for de-risking the finance that could come from the private sector, especially with their excellent stuff. But there is another element. The gap of finance by this report, and if you don't have time, just check the chart. It's called here, a climate finance framework. You can Google it. And if you are busy, read the executive summary. There is a summary of the summary, and there is a chart in number 9. So just you can read it, and with the numbers and with the percentage change required. And by reading this chart, you can just claim expertise on the gaps. I'm just joking, but the serious work is on the DRM side. If 1 trillion is required from the external side, heavy lifting is going to be coming from the Egypt, the UAE, the Ghana, and the Lebanon of the world by saying that, thank you, we need $1.4 trillion from you. This is 70% of finance that should be mobilized. That requires 2 things. First, you cannot really just go forever by generous assumptions. You need to deal with debt and debt service, because this is eating up something like more than what we spend in a typical developing economy today, than what we spend on education and health and essential service. So you cannot go and tell Minister of Finance, and please do 70% now. They need to get their act together on debt service, in reprioritization of their budget, especially on the fossil fuel subsidy, And domestic resource mobilization is not just about public finance. It's about domestic private sector. So people like Jay have been talking forever about the importance of deepening the financial market, local currency board markets, issues related to exchange rate risk. If you finish all of that, given that I'm in the presence of a very distinguished Minister of Foreign Trade, there are other things that we need to be prepared for. If you have this discussion a couple of years ago, I wouldn't tell you about 3 risks that are now apparent. One, great news for my good friends where I live now in the US. The IRA, good news for the US, making it more attractive, substantive support to the businesses. Trillions of dollars leverage as well. So many people that you both know are thinking twice. Should I go to not just to the Middle East, or should I go to Europe? Because Kentucky is much more attractive to me than forever before. I'm talking about a specific project. The southern states of the US could be more attractive in wind farms and solar than going to the Middle East, with less risk and subsidy if there is anything wrong. The other one, if you are finished with that, our friends in Europe are not making our lives easier by CBAM, the cross-border border adjustment mechanism. And this is going to be an interesting dynamic. It has positive news for some people who are decarbonizing the hard-to-abate sector. Act fast. So you need to do that kind of work now in decarbonization of steel, aluminum, and all of that. But that requires investments of the sizes that the minister just mentioned now, not just in the energy sector, but on these hard-to-abate sector. And then I have another risk, but don't take that as a joke or anything, because this is serious. We are familiar with all types of risks, and Jay spends time in different universities, teaches them and how to deal with them. And in today's world, it's better to have risk than uncertainty, because we know how to deal with risk, not uncertainty. But there is a growing risk now, which I call it the MOU's risk. You go sign an MOU with a counterpart, with a financier, everybody's clapping, you get an airtime. Perhaps in a good day you can capture the interest of the journalists of the Wall Street and Financial Times. 2 years after, this is a real case scenario. Your counterparts in some of the advanced economies, they change position, change government. And you are preparing your green hydrogen, and you are ready for inaction, but those guys are not there. So here I would say, save the ink on MOUs, get directly on the offtake agreement, get these top advisors with you from the very beginning, and don't embarrass yourself and your country, and worse, because this is all sending signals and dynamics that are not really needed. So opportunities are there, risks are there, but all have solutions. The only thing that needs really to come to support all of that is the political leadership behind that. And that's why we see in our host country, many good things that had been settled technically and the policy side, they get implemented because there is a political leadership that gets things done.
Thank you, Dr. Mohiddin. Very comprehensive view of this scene for investments in renewables. Your Excellency, still on the investment side of the discussion, the recently announced fund Altera, which was revealed at this COP, has the potential to significantly impact the renewable sector in the region. Could you share a little bit of insights on how this fund is going to function, its strategy, focus countries?
Thank you, Rasha. And I'll answer the question, and then I'll jump to the point which His Excellency Mohiddin was talking about. Altera is an idea of bringing the financial institution on board, because they have the expertise and they have the technology, they have the capability to combine such a huge, massive mobilization of funds. And at the same time, it's going to be only the seed. So our ultimate goal is to reach a value of more than $250 billion. Are we there yet? No, but things are structuring internally, where we're going to focus on some of the projects in the developing countries, and the rest is going to be purely commercial. The mindset which we want to bring into the table here, that governments cannot continue working alone without bringing everyone on board. And the private sector is going to showcase here and mobilizing such funds in very short period in comparison to the normal funds that we're having. The details of the Altera fund is going to be announced very soon. We're still in the framework and governance structure, but I can assure you that it's going to be as well contributing to de-risk many of the projects that the colleagues were talking about, especially reducing the interest rates on the clean energy and green projects that goes to small islands. Coming back to the region as well in general, the issue is not only with the MOU. I totally agree with His Excellency Muhyiddin on the MOUs. It's about the separations from the negotiators with the stakeholders, with the technical stakeholders within those countries. Sometimes you go and have a deal with the relevant entity or the ministry, and then that has to be passed to the technical organizations, who sometimes are not convinced or they don't want to deal with you, and they keep lagging on and keep the discussion moving on until the new government comes on. And what is the benefits? Nothing. Second issue which we've been facing on most of the discussion when it comes to the investments, you are ready to move quickly and mobilize your teams, institutions, financial entities with you, but you get stuck with the legals and regulations in those countries. You're not allowed to own your investments, or you have to have a local partners who you don't know, or you have to have a specific commodities that you have to buy it from the local market, which does not fulfill the standards, the international standards that you have to invest in. So you get stuck on those investments. And the other issues which we are seeing as well, even with the announcement of $4.5 billion investments in Africa, we need another $4.5 billion for the infrastructure, either roads or connections or grid, etc. Who's going to do that? So even if you're having everything and you're ready to mobilize, you need a lot of spending and expenditures, which is not going to make the project visible whatsoever. And looking at the current situation, governments around the world, and especially in our region, the developing countries, they're not ready to move. They just want you to do everything. And sometimes they might decide as well to stop the projects at the middle of the developments, which creates another hassle into the way that we're running businesses. Why we're bringing Altera on board? This is going to be a serious money. This is going to be a serious international organization, international financial institutions, which is going to bring the international entities as well on board, which is going to, for sure, going to de-risk the projects and force the governments to work on. Otherwise, we'll not be able to do anything. We'll just go and keep meeting in COPs from year to year without serious and concrete movements on the projects.
Thank you, Your Excellency. My maybe a different but relevant question is private-public partnerships, PPPs, they have a great role to help mobilize capital into the renewable sector. How do you see this functioning in the best way possible? How can actually this become a way to crowd in investments as opposed to crowding out investments?
Thank you. If we take a little bit of a step back, what's preventing private capital from coming into addressing this most important question, which is how do we get to being more ESG focused, friendly, renewable, as being a part of that nucleus, if you want, an section of what private sector does. The private sector is really our simple animals. What do they focus on mostly? It's business pressures. What do I mean by business pressure? It's pressure for them to do what is expected of them to do, to listen to their constituents. And who are their constituents? There are three. They have investors/shareholders, they have clients/customers, and they have employees. And it's pressures from those three that will get them to do more in being corporate, sort of socially responsible constituents. But until that gets addressed and sorted for, we're going not to ever address and see the amount of private sector investments that we need to see. So we're looking at $1 trillion investments per year in emerging markets, up from 128. That's an 8-fold investment that needs to happen. So how do we encourage that? How we do get to all of that? And PPP is a part of it. But you need to address a whole continuum of things. One is policy, regulation, and allowing the private sector to have a foot into that door. I think a very genius idea came out of the US when they did the Inflation Reduction Act, and I agree with you, Dr. Muhyiddin. That saw $150 billion worth of investments in manufacturing, into solar and renewable, into batteries, etc., that came not just from within the U.S., from outside of the U.S. as well. So that had a suction machine that came into it as a result of that. And I look at that as a form of a PPP, frankly. I look at that as a form where government enabled people to come in and participate in the private sector into a very important system and ecosystem. What are we seeing here in the region? We're starting to see more of these take place. We're starting to see PPPs in this purest of form. So, and addressing that through both infrastructure, because I agree with His Excellency that infrastructure is a core component towards enabling the path towards looking at renewables more aggressively and more systemically and more consistently. So I think that's been a form of it. But to fundamentally get the private sector to be a bigger participant into this, they need incentive schemes for them. And what do we need by that? They need to see a reduction in risk taking. So if the governments or the likes of the EBRD or the World Bank or other organizations come in and provide first loss guarantees and provide a system for which they are less likely to lose before somebody else loses money, that encourages them. Getting things like tax breaks or breaks towards how they look at that investment, make it be economically attractive to them. I think the economic attractiveness of something, there's nothing that mobilizes the private sector more than profitability and economic returns and guaranteed returns. So, and so that is going to be an incredibly important components into all of that. But also having financial instruments that allow for all of that to take place. So green bonds, but the green bonds need to be attractive. There should be tax breaks given to people that participate, or companies or corporates or private sector that participates in things like green bonds or other renewable means. So until you make it something that impacts the business side of it, and again, business side could be profitability, but business side could be pressures from the constituents that come around that, we won't see the level of private investments that we all are hoping to see. So I think when you look at it all, it's an ecosystem. And that ecosystem comes from partnerships with the governments, with the policymakers, and there needs to be consistency in the approaches of regulations and everything that fits with that. And the previous panel addressed that point. There's not a consistency in also frameworks and regulation that addresses all of these things, which are very important. And then fundamentally, you end up looking at the private sector will be your plug. The private sector is there. It's got means, it's got capital, it's got the ability, but it just needs more of these enablers that it on its own will never do, because again, they have pressures from their shareholders, from the particularly public companies and public investment houses. They're going to need to get that push. And I think this region in particular, the GCC, has been really good at being a force for nature of good, of influence, and to allow this to start. I think there's a lot more that can be done there.
Thank you, Mai. So Jay, we have seen a growing momentum in green finance globally, and the Middle East is not an exception. Also, a great momentum for ESG consideration. This has been ESG standards. They've been more and more endorsed by investment banks, including in the MENA region. How can we use this momentum to accelerate private capital mobilization into renewables?
Look, I think I'd say a couple of things. One is what you're seeing in terms of what the UAE presidency has done here is to just increase by a factor the private sector engagement in this process. And the world has needed that for a long time, and we started that process at Glasgow. But I think, and I don't know if you agree with this, but one thing that we've seen here is just intensive engagement between the private sector and the public sector around concrete proposals to act. And that's part of this, is just the willing leadership and the committed leadership of the private sector. But it's focused, and we need it to be focused. I'll give you a couple examples. One is the engagement of the private sector in the JET-P process on the enabling environment. So there's two ways you can de-risk a country to scale and speed up renewable energy. One is you can diminish the risk. You can lessen the risk of the environment, right? So you can improve the environment. Well, in the JET-P process, we wrote memos, not the policy community, we the private sector. People like me sat down and said, Indonesia, if you want private sector investment, this is what your PPA has to look like. This is what you need to do to shorten the period of the permitting for the grids. And we did a memo that laid out exactly what has to happen. And the world needs more private sector-led enabling environment recommendations so that we hold countries accountable to lay that base layer. The second thing is that direct engagement of the mitigation tools. I've written with my partners at Citi very specific recommendations of what works and doesn't work to mitigate single B, double B type risk. And we need the regulators in the room because right now a lot of those structures that we think should work don't work from a regulatory capital perspective. By the way, with the intent after the financial crisis of regulators to put real limitations on infrastructure because of the duration, illiquidity, and credit zip codes. So we need to sit down with them and make these products work. I've been saying, my friends probably heard me say this so many times, it's painful, but we need 1,000 times more MEGA. I mean, literally, we don't have the political risk insurance, the breach of contract, the non-honoring type guarantee structures that we absolutely need. By the way, not just for the renewable space, but across the board for the mitigation and energy transition roadmap. And I think if you look at the process right now of MDB reform, in that it's very G20 capital efficiency oriented. We still haven't gotten to the point yet where we've really developed the tools that will mitigate us at the speed and scale that we're going to need for this. And I just make one last point because we were in a session together with the negotiators, I guess it's already a week ago now, over the new collective quantified goal. And you mentioned Vera and Nigel's fantastic second report on the quantum, the amount of money that we will ultimately need in the post-Copenhagen next goal for the world. But what's very clear and should be very painful to everybody is those numbers, there's no way that official provisioning gets you anywhere close. So in the math of the goal next year, we got 1 year, we're going to commit to a quantum of a number that relies entirely on a mobilization rate. Embedded in the assumption of that goal and our ability to get there is going to be a certain amount of official monies, and we're going to have imagined a multiplier of that that gets us to the quantum that is committed to. And that means that the mobilization rate, it has to work. It means we have to get very granular about really what mobilizes. And right now, just to give you an example, if we need a 4 to 5, to throw out a number, times mobilization rate of the official monies to get to the private sector mobilization that we need to get to the quantum of the funds to the emerging markets. We're going to need to look very specifically at all of the tools in that toolkit and see what they really do. And right now, there's $80 billion of MDB money in that toolkit. What does that mobilize? Mobilizes 17. That's not a mobilization rate, that's a fraction. In fact, it's a small fraction. So we've got to go from the fraction, the small fraction, to 4 to 5 times. And over the course of the next year, we've got to figure all of that out. And I just don't think we're moving fast enough to understand how important that mobilization rate is and the toolkit reforms we need.
Thank you, Jay. And Dr. Mohideen, as you see, almost every panelist mentioned the role of MDBs. What can they really do to create de-risking modalities Can you think of successful examples of de-risking modalities that worked somewhere else that we could then replicate in the Middle East?
Right. Thank you so much. And I think some sort of common sense needs to prevail in order to accommodate all of the explicit and implicit recommendations by the Honorable Minister, by Mai, and by Jay here. Let me summarize it, because I like very much what the Minister mentioned, and Mai said it as well: the system, the ecosystem, and of course the emphasis on what should be done differently at scale, which you emphasized. And I think the common sense here, we are in the land, as I always emphasize, this is the land of wisdom, of saying, well, prevent harm first. And the first is basically by preventing those who are not qualified to do the function of the public sector and the private sector to intervene in this area, because this is a completely different domain. And the public sector needs to do its function: regulation, supervision, de-risking, paving the rest of the business environment, investing in human capital, like those nice children in schools, and getting them healthy and acquainted with the new technologies. But the private sector role needs to be realized, and this is basically, it's like horses for courses, yeah? This is the land as well of good horses, but we have good competition from my wife's governor at Al Sharqiyya. We have good horses as well there. So there are horses that are good in dancing, others in racing, and other horses could just be protected for beauty and all of that. So first thing, I would say MDBs should stop the harm, and I hope one day that will ever be a loan, soft or otherwise, from the MDBs to do what the public-private partnership can do, especially in airports, seaports. These are straightforward projects that the private sector can take the lead on, and the MDBs do not need more than perhaps de-risking, some support, technical assistance, capacity development for governments, lending help on contractual agreements that takes 30 years, 40 years. That would be a great job there for the MDBs. The other thing here, and I can summarize it on the 3 days with the quick history of 3 funds, just to know how these kind of funds mobilize and function. First day, loss and damage. This is a fund that no one, including my country, I hope and pray that will never need the use of this loss and damage fund. But it's there for precautionary contingency, God forbid, something disastrous happens. But unfortunately, we need it because we are not doing as we should in the mitigation and adaptation front. But that fund had been a dream for 20 years until it was realized in Sharm el-Sheikh. Last minute decision in Sharm el-Sheikh, first minute decision in Dubai. What happened in between? Tough people working hard in the transition committee, supported by political wisdom, and then we get that done. This is a story. Another one, the replenishment of the Green Climate Fund, that I was a facilitator. It was an idea in 2009, and then it was realized, we have an expert here, how many years it took until it was operational, like 10 years, when you started to say a fund to 2017, 2018? 2015. So from 2009 to 2015, and then we started to have a shape, and people know where it exists and all of that, another couple of years. So this is another process of building funds. Then you have the third fund that the Honorable Minister mentioned. Conceptually, it took a year, I know from the team. Hard work by the team, and then political leadership. Now the fund is there. It is ready to disburse funds in the next day. So this is the kind of speed coming from different sources of finance that all need to work together in order to realize the potential. MDBs are not just about the finance, very much important, and that's what I said, capital increase, and I wish that the G20 in Brazil should take really in the summit a decision to make this capital increase, because it takes 2 to 3 years of preparations and 2 to 3 years of implementation until you get the capital increase. I was part of the last capital increase in the case of the World Bank. Assume that there is learning by doing. The 3 years could be 1 year, but it will not really be 1 month. It's not going to be like Altera. So in this case, if you are serious, many of you are wearing these SDGs, if we are going to that old pace, if there is a decision end of 2024, you will be getting the MDBs financed by 2030. This is the time that Mai and Jay want really to be partnering with, and they cannot really assume that these institutions are going to be big enough for their partnership. And this is basically my my plea and my advice to my good friends at the World Bank. In order to be relevant enough, you need to be big enough. And there is no competition between better bank and bigger bank. You need to be better bank and bigger bank. And in order to have people like Mai and Jay and the leaders of their institutions sitting with Jai Banga and his vice president, they can go and have dinner because they are old friends. But they will not have dinner because they mean business. Because there are others in the system now that can really avail the fund. Perhaps they can go and knock on the doors of Dr. Sultan and his colleagues because they have 30 billion, not like the whole African Development Bank with capacity to lend of no more than 10 billion. So this is a fast changing world, and we need really to keep up with it. In this business of climate, we are talking about future, not history. In this business forever of finance, we're not talking about legacy banks and legacy financial institutions. We're talking about capable institutions that can really be adequate partners in times of high risk and uncertainty. And there is no alternative than common sense. Capitalize these institutions, otherwise you will lose their best asset, which is not the buildings that they have in Washington and around the world, or in the case of Cote d'Ivoire or in the Philippines. They will go, as we see it, in other places that appreciate their knowledge and appreciate their wisdom, and this will be a great loss down the road. So I think there is a great opportunity to realize this ecosystem by closing the gaps, getting all of the elements of the ecosystem empowered. None of these are, because especially my friends, the tough negotiators of developing economies, my good friend Wael Abul Magd and Ambassador Wael and Nasr, when people say DRM, they say, well, those guys are going to be selling us cheap when it comes to public finance concessional. No, DRM is essential, and it's not a substitute to private finance. It's not a substitute to concessional finance, and it's not a substitute to MDB's work. It's an ecosystem that needs to work together, public, private, domestic, and external, and deal with this kind of super demanding world when it comes to gaps.
Thank you, Dr. Mohiddin. Thank you, esteemed panelists. Thank you, Your Excellency, and congratulations again on what has been a very successful COP. Thank you, Mai. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Dr. Mohiddin. Thanks to our audience in person and remotely, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you.